the Irish. So we have a number of different events throughout the year on different topics, and the one today is on systemic evaluation in an uncertain world. I suppose there's lots of conversations around me at the moment around evaluation, so I'm not sure for anyone else, and I'm really interested in this topic and how it connects with systems thinking. And I feel really honoured today to be able to introduce our speaker, Barbara, who's here today. So Barbara Schmidt-Abbey. Barbara has been a huge support to me in my own journey around evaluation and also systems thinking, and she brings huge insight and experiences to this, which I'm sure you'll hear about today. And just to share a bit about Barbara's experience. So Barbara has worked in evaluation for many, many years, primarily at a European level with Eurofound, but she's also been doing her PhD looking at systemic evaluation, and particularly around this topic that she's going to share insights with today. Barbara's a member of SCiO Ireland, and she's based in Dublin here. So there's lots of things that we could open up for discussion today around systems evaluation, or systemic evaluation. But today is really just a start. It's an introduction, and we welcome you along today as a conversation. And we hope you'll find it helpful. You might notice myself or Sebastian here to help Barbara today as well. So we'll be kind of just part of supporting that process. So to start it off today, we have a little whiteboard that Sebastian is now going to share. And we just wanted to get a sense of where people were in terms of how proficient do you feel in terms of systems and evaluation. So we're just going to talk you through. So you'll see the little green dots here on the screen. So if you're feeling proficient in evaluation, you would place yourself up quite high, or if you're feeling quite proficient in systems, you would place yourself over towards to the right. So if you want to do this, you just click on the screen with your mouse and you select one of the green dots. So we'll invite you to do that now and select a green dot and just place wherever you feel on the screen, so we can get a sense of where people are feeling in terms of their proficiency. So, and just welcome to everyone that's still arriving. I hear people there at the moment and that as well, so you're very welcome. And I'm going to hand over to Barbara to take over from here.
Okay, thank you so much, Louise, and thank you so much, Sebastian, for the support, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many here. And to take us on this joint discovery of what systemic evaluation can mean for us in uncertain times. And thank you also for populating this card. Went a bit haywire, but that's great to see so many of you with experience in evaluation and in systems respectively. And yeah, keep populating that. We can use this. I think it will be useful for yourselves to see where you are yourselves in relation to these different proficiencies, and maybe it's a nice baseline to look back at over time, and also for yourselves maybe to think, oh, I'm very good at this, but maybe I can develop further in another area. So maybe this is a useful warm-up exercise. So maybe we'll leave that for another minute or so, and then we will put the whiteboard. So if you haven't placed yourself yet, grab a dot here on the left. You find some dots, green dots, which Sebastian already prepared for you to grab. So just grab one with your cursor and put it somewhere. So again, to maybe to explain that again. So on the left side we have well, no, we actually on the top axis we have evaluation proficiency, and on the horizontal one we have systems proficiency, and you see a lot of dots in the top right quarter, which means you're all experts or quite well experienced in evaluating. Systems proficiency is very high. It's actually a lot of you seem to have experience in both evaluation and systems, which is amazing. So it's, yeah, great. So we'll let you, and some of you are more in evaluation and maybe not so much in systems as well, which is great. So we have a very diverse audience. We have dots in all quadrants, which is interesting. We will maybe give it another 2 seconds, a couple of seconds, and then I'll be stopping I think I have to stop the whiteboard and then share my screen for the presentation. And then we have, maybe while we do this, I'll just mention to you already a little bit how the structure of this day this session is. So because we realized preparing this, it's a huge topic. And we found out that it's not possible to cover everything that's worthwhile saying in just an hour. So we decided to make this really an introduction today. This will be quite it's quite it's an introduction, so don't expect any major solutions or new insights, but it's an introduction to help us think about this topic together, systemic evaluation in uncertain times. What could that mean? And then we're already planning a follow-up event early in the new year, which can be then a deeper dive into some methods, some frameworks, some more practical tools, if you like, and develop that a little bit deeper. So today is really going to be an introduction, also because we saw that a lot of people joining from all over the world, and as we can see, wow, even Australia. So well done for all of you coming to this event. And so we really wanted to make this an easy introduction to for people also who are from diverse backgrounds as well, so as we can see here on this whiteboard. So this is an introduction. And now maybe after appreciating this whiteboard and it's seeing yourselves all on this with dots on the board with very diverse experiences, maybe, and we will capture this. I think Sebastian is going to take a screenshot of this, so we can come back to this and share this further. So, but maybe we can now. I will share my presentation, which actually will mean that the whiteboard will end. I think just share my presentation. Sorry, Louise, you were saying something?
I said that's perfect. Yeah.
So I share my presentation now. Can you see it? No. One second. Right here. So it will close now for you. Whiteboard. So can you see my screen?
Yeah, I think on the second slide, Barbara. Yeah, so you just need to, yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I need to go into, 1 second, present modes. Yeah, okay. Okay, so now, welcome everybody again, and 1 second. So this is my own question here, actually, which brought me here, invites my own inquiry about this topic, which is why I want to invite you all to explore this together in today's session. So can we make shifts to more systemic evaluations is the overarching question I'm pairing myself to this. So in today's session, we are going to cover the following: a gentle introduction, as I mentioned, some concepts first, and about also recognition that there is a need for systemic evaluation, and then changing our practices and ourselves how to do this. And this will be interspersed with plenty of breakout discussion spaces as we go along. So you will be put into breakout groups at particular points, first in pairs and then in groups of 3. And then we will also have some plenary discussions. So this is how this is proposed to go. Okay, so let's dive into this. So what is actually evaluating? So there are, as well, we normally start with definitions. So, and there are plenty of definitions about this. So I decided to just go for some notable one that has been provided by an evaluation guru, Michael Scriven, in the early 90s, and which have been adopted then worldwide by the different evaluation associations and standard bodies. Is simply that evaluation is a systematic process to determine merit, worth, value, or significance of something. That's what Michael Scriven has defined. And then this has been taken further in recent times by the definition from 2022, so quite recently, by the Better Evaluations Initiative, which now suggests that evaluation is any systematic process to judge merit, worth, and significance, as defined by Scriven already, by combining evidence and values. So this is the extended definition. So as evaluation is any systematic process to judge merit, worth, and significance by combining evidence and values. So this is one definition. And we can notice there the emphasis on systematic process and also a judgment, evidence-based judgment on what merit, so it's a value judgment, and values. So these are maybe three important elements there. Then we also have evaluative thinking in contrast to this. So there we have a nice definition by another big evaluation guru, Michael Quinn-Patton. Many of you may be familiar with him. And Michael Quinn-Patton is defining evaluative thinking as in distinction to evaluation, that evaluation is an activity, so a noun, whereas evaluative thinking is a way of doing business, so any kind of business. So that's maybe the two large concepts when talking about evaluation and evaluative thinking. And then this leads us to the recognition that we actually evaluate all the time. So taking this further, this idea, there is this book by Yolande Wadsworth, which I have a screenshot here of, which I really recommend, which applies evaluation to our daily lives in the spirit of evaluative thinking and being, if you like. So it recognizes that we actually evaluate all the time. So here's just some examples. So when we meet someone for the first time, we're making an evaluation of whether we find this person interesting to engage with, or maybe better to avoid, or so we're making instant evaluations there. When we go through today's emails, we're making an evaluation. Is this important now, urgent, or something for later, or something for the junk mail? Or if we walk into a shop, we make an evaluation where it's worthwhile or important for me to go first. Do I need to buy some groceries or maybe some wine? That's an evaluation, perhaps. Or decide on the week's activities. Do I go to a meeting, or do I turn up at a webinar like this one, or do I do something else, or take a leave or whatever? So that's an evaluation. So basically, anytime we decide what things are important or not important, worthwhile or not, we're making evaluations. If we notice any discrepancies between things, that's an evaluation, or any difference between is or ought, for example. All of these are examples. Okay, so welcome back to the plenary. Always a bit of a interesting experience, this zooming in and out from breakout groups to plenary. So welcome back, everybody. I think can we close the breakout rooms now? Okay. Okay, so to continue, then after you had a quick exchange about which evaluations you did already make today, I hope you had you found some between you. Okay, then let's move on in the interest of time. So after this appreciation of what evaluation and evaluative thinking is, and everyday evaluation. So, but there are situations when we have to evaluate more formally in the definition of evaluation as an activity. So when we encounter this, typically we have evaluation in public policy making, which maybe many of you that work in either public policy or other realms of public life will be probably familiar and part of, indeed, of evaluation in that realm as a tool in the public policy toolbox. So you probably know evaluation in that regard yourself. So there is, for example, here is just one example of a publication about evaluation for policymaking as a tool. So, for example, we can use evaluation then as a tool to assess, are we there yet about policies that have some objectives and a way of finding out whether we are actually following these objectives and getting there. So it's part of the evidence-based policymaking paradigm, basically, and there are lots of standards and guidelines issued that define how it ought to be done well, to be to lead to good quality evaluations, to be of service to the to providing evidence to policy making and decision making in general. It's also acknowledged typically that that evaluation is, or no, sorry, evidence is not the only factor that will determine policies. What it is a factor, and there is of course policymakers who make the decisions ultimately, and that includes many other considerations, political ones, value judgments, etc. So they have to take the responsibility for taking the actual decisions, whereas evidence is a source of support to that. It should support policy making and decision making, but it does not make, evidence does not make the decision. So that's actually an important distinction in the evidence-based policy paradigm, or evidence-informed policy making, as it's now more often called now, to acknowledge this distinction. Okay, but evaluation is a tool in the public policy toolbox. And there are lots of evaluation standards and guidelines, which maybe we can spend, it's worthwhile having a quick little look at that. So there are lots of guidelines and standards, and I just assembled a small taster of examples here on this picture, and looking just at some of them. So for example, one prominent example that many of us that work at European Union level, which is certainly my case, and anybody else's case that works in EU contexts, would be very familiar with the better regulation guidelines of the European Commission, which is basically regulating how evaluation and better regulations, as they call it, has to be done based on, and evaluation is a very important principle and tool for that. For example, there is the evaluate first principle for any EU regulations and regulatory acts and policies at EU level. And so evaluation is actually a very important instrument in that context. So there is the better regulation toolbox guidelines here, and that contains also a lot of tools, a whole large toolbox, which defines how evaluations should be done, how to carry out an evaluation, and other things like fitness checks, etc. So there is a toolbox there which basically determines this is how you should do it, and basically the methodologies of how to do evaluations are defined there, and this is how evaluations at the EU level are then done. There's also other evaluation, but in the same spirit and same principles, there are other nice evaluation handbook that has been recently published just earlier this year. Has been this evaluation handbook here, which is gives a very, anyway, there are also links there. You could look them if you're interested. There's also, just again as flavor, there is, for example, here the OECD DAC criteria. These are really important to know because they actually define, they are replicated in any national and supranational guidance anywhere. Basically, the 5 DAC criteria, as they are called, which are relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, coherence, and sustainability, and variance thereof. So these 5 DAC criteria you may often hear referred to, and often it's required to evaluate interventions on all of these, like in the better regulation guidelines as well. And then we have some various guidelines at national level, and there I just picked out 2 because that's of relevance to so many of you. There is, for example, in the UK, and I'm well aware that the UK is not part of the EU, but it's nonetheless worthwhile mentioning because it's actually a very good and comprehensive guideline for evaluating guidelines. And they have notably also a supplement on evaluating in complexity, which I think is the only guideline I'm aware of which actually explicitly addresses this. So that's why the Magenta book is an interesting source. And then because we are in SCiO Ireland here, we also, of course, have some guidance in Ireland about guides to evaluating, planning, and managing public investments. This one is here. There are probably other guidelines. Okay, this gives you just a flavor of the number of guidelines that there are. Then just some common features are perhaps worth noting as well. What's in all of these guidelines is basically it's basically based on results-based management philosophy and principles. So on all guidelines, you would find variants of this intervention logic, basically, which is a theory obtained that any intervention or program or project that's being evaluated, any intervention is basically composed of these intervention logic frameworks. I won't go into details because many of you are familiar with that, but just to recognize that this is the intervention logic which underpins all of these guidelines conventionally. And we may come back to this because this is important. I want you to take note of that, because when we discuss complexity, uncertainty, volatility, and all of that, this is perhaps maybe this does not help us much further. This might be something to come back to. So intervention logics is what evaluation guidelines are built on. And then maybe to come to a closure on this particular section here, it's also a recognition that evaluation is political. So this is actually certainly in Ireland, we probably have been aware of the Irish government has just 2 weeks ago launched an evaluation on the response to the COVID-19 pandemic in Ireland. So this was launched, and instead of an inquiry, it was decided to set up an evaluation. So this actually then caused some interesting discussions in the Irish media, for example. So there you see here some snippets of some recent newspaper articles referring to this. For example, here the Irish Times. These are all just examples from the Irish Times, one of the leading Irish newspapers. So there is some criticism of this evaluation. For example, this here saying this is a yes minister approach to a COVID inquiry. An evaluation is not an inquiry, but the question what happened, for example, in nursing homes, etc., will not go away. So that's a criticism, or various similar criticisms. So which in a way just is interesting, because this actually is a discussion about what is evaluation in a public domain here, and maybe has something to do with the uncertainty and certainly the political nature of evaluation. Okay, now we going to, after having taken this view of the traditional evaluation approaches and some assumptions that are underpinning how evaluation is done in the public policy domain. So now this is another big question that we would invite you now to discuss again in breakout groups of 3 this time. And because this is a big question, we're giving that 5 minutes in breakout groups, which Sebastian is preparing shortly now, and just explain. So you have 5 minutes in the breakout groups to discuss with 3 people, amongst 3 people, for about 5 minutes. And then we come back to the plenary, and then we give it 10 minutes in the plenary to discuss it with all of us, because this is such an important question. So I hope you had a good discussion in your breakout groups with 3 people. And now we give it about 10 minutes. I think we have 4 minutes, right? We have 10 minutes to just share, come up and in your different groups. So now we invite you all to, I think we're probably how we do it, and Louise and Sebastian will help with the facilitation here if necessary. So probably the best thing is to do a show of hands, and who wants to, who wants to share what came up.
Wonder, Barbara, as well, if we could stop slideshow for a few minutes,
Yeah.
if that's okay, just so we can see each other maybe as well.
Yes. Oh, yeah, much better. Thank you, Louise. Great idea. Okay, so what came up in your discussions about this? Who wants to share something?
Barbara, Liliana was starting to tell us about a project they are assessing. So I think that she could probably say this for the whole group. What about this, Liliana?
Yes, in fact, we didn't have time to discuss everything we intended to. So my view was that we realized that complexity is a challenge in the context of traditional evaluations, and we are looking for solutions. We all look for system thinking to help us to do it in an easier way for us as evaluators and also for stakeholders to understand better. And as an example, I started to share with my colleagues was that we are now evaluating in Romania, and Romania has a long border with Ukraine. And the war has multiple effects on everything, on social or economy, on connectivity. So how to capture in different policies the influence of the war and the related consequences is a big challenge. How to do it because you have to select for the specific policies what is the most relevant, and it's not the same for all in different cases. For example, when you evaluate the region development program compared with a national program, for example, transport connectivity changed a lot priorities, considering the support to Ukraine to ensure the transport of their merchandises and all the communications with the rest of Europe. So this is an example of a complexity challenge in policy evaluation.
Yeah, great example. Thank you, Liliana. That's really great to hear a practical example of that. Actually, I noticed, Yvonne, I think you had your hand up as well earlier. Was there something you want to share with us, Yvonne?
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, briefly, what occurred to me about the question is it fit for purpose? The question is whose purpose and who's deciding? And with the kind of encroachment of politicization of evaluations, the example you gave on the screen is close to home. And I think that's a key point about how evaluations are being undermined or usurped or utilized in a way that isn't appropriate. But what can we actually do about that, you know, is the question that I don't have the answer to. So that was the first thing that hopped out at me. And the other thing that hopped out at me from the question was, the way it was framed, was about the sense of evidence or data, and you know, the difficulties in that. In fact, in our group, we talked about how it's a bit akin to the point just being made about in the conflict situation, fast-moving situations where how difficult it is to pin down data and to operate in a timely way and to have access to reliable data. So the methods need to be adapted, I think, to take that into account, because that's not just a conflict as a result of conflict, but fast-moving environments that we're working in, I think. So those are my two. Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. These are very, very important points, all of these.
I wonder if I can say something really quickly about that, if that's okay, Barbara. I just want to say I think that's such an important point you're making, Siobhan. And I was at an event actually on Tuesday down in Kilkenny, and with people, we were talking about lived experiences and lived and living experiences. And I think exactly what you're talking about, purpose, is so important, and ensuring that evaluation doesn't become just a space of legitimization, that it actually stays grounded in people's experiences, and that it supports us to work with and for people and societies and communities and that as well. So I really, really appreciate what you brought up on that there too. So thank you.
Absolutely. And is there on that same, the same way, are there other things that the question evoked in your discussions in other groups that you'd like to bring up here?
Anna, maybe you want to share what you briefly shared with me, which I found very insightful.
Sure, thanks, Sebastian. It's not really on that subject, but I suppose it more addresses the broader question. So I guess my reaction to the question was, in many respects, well, of course, traditional evaluation isn't fit for purpose in our modern world. Indeed, was it ever, in terms of tracking outcomes, given what we know about how complex it is to identify outcomes? But on the other hand, I'm conscious that very often we're still trying to embed more traditional approaches to evaluation. So the question then becomes, rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater, how do we use what we have and evolve it into perhaps thinking about a more learning space? So how do we use the traditional approaches of evaluation to do something a little bit more systemic or a little bit more learning orientated, so that we can use those tools for a wider purpose? I think there's all kinds of complexities in there, though, and there's all kinds of challenges in doing that in real life around, what kind of data are we collecting? Why are we collecting the data? All of those things, as well as the questions that other people have raised. But certainly coming from a public sector perspective, I think we need that balance between, well, what do we have and what are we trying to do in terms of purpose?
Thanks.
Yeah, very good.
Maybe
Thank
last,
you.
being mindful of time also, Barbara.
Yes.
Maybe Ellen going last.
Yeah, Ellen has her hand raised. So Ellen, would you? And we have 3 more minutes now, I think. Ellen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this event. It's a topic as Barbara knows, I love dearly. I think in my work, I do evaluation, but I use primarily a systemic thinking as the primary lenses through which I gaze through. And I think my first exposure to evaluation was in the United States, where we had a large federal grant, like $5 million, and we were required by the government to include 15% of that budget in evaluation as part of the design of the intervention. So we had evaluation embedded from the very beginning, and it helped the external evaluators helped us design indicators, tools. So it was an ongoing living process. So when I stepped into the world of global development, I was quite surprised to find that it's a very summative activity, which is not as helpful, in my opinion, whatsoever, to help guide the learning throughout and to respond to emergence. And I think that that's the piece that we should push against around the funding model, around why is an evaluation included at the front end to help design the logic, a systemic theory of change versus just a logic model that goes with some preset assumptions and doesn't allow the flexibility or the budget or the resources or whatever to respond to what you're finding in the field and what you're finding with the intervention, because that's the whole purpose of an intervention, is to guide change. So that's my ongoing advocacy in my little corner of the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ellen. That's great for sharing that. And I think this also leads us very nicely to the next section and yeah, the ongoing. So it's a very nice segue. But we have maybe 40 seconds if anybody else urgently wants to share. So I think, is that a hand, Orla, from you? Is it? Orla?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
No, just a quick reaction to that, to a systemic theory of change, which I think has been mostly missing. And it kind of ties to something maybe Louise was saying earlier. I think, and the way that I approach systemic design is that I place people. So, much of what I look at is behavioral change. And so the initial picture of the state of things should be revealed hand in hand with people that are at the center of whatever the action is, or at the center of the policy or program or activity. So I think it's not just a question of integrating these methods at the beginning, but rather who's actually at the table and, you know, and establishing the nature of things, the state of things, the system, the constellation of conditions that you need to tackle. So I completely agree with everything that well, everything that everyone said, but and particularly with Helen.
I agree, Orla. I would just add one more thing, is that it's not just for us, it's for the work that we do. It's not just people, but it's the human and the non-human consideration.
Absolutely.
So how do we bring that river's voice to the table? How do we bring the forest? How do we bring the fact that it's a post-conflict setting? How do we bring, you know, so how do we be systemic about who's at the table and how to represent those voices? And so that's another piece that I would add to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's so much to talk about there. So that's why we framed this just as an introduction, and we will follow up for sure. For sure, we already get a glimpse of how much there is to unpack in that. In the interest of time for this session, I suggest that we move on now and have one more part and to cover, and then we will definitely follow up on all of this. So bear with us. So, I will share my screen again now to continue. So because we will stop on time. Okay, so we've discussed this. Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing your thoughts on this. So now we just to bring us into this next piece, how can we make evaluation more fit for VUCA conditions? And you already spoke about this so well in all your contributions. So we all now know what VUCA is. I don't need to explain that to you anymore. So it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this is how we experience the world increasingly, whether or not the world itself is VUCA or our experience. That's another discussion perhaps, but anyway, this is all coming at us. We've all lived through the pandemic, and we've certainly experienced the VUCA experience there, all of us. And then just coming out of it, we were confronted with a war in Europe, in Ukraine. And then we have lots of experiences with climate change, biodiversity loss, poverty, hunger, crisis, lots of unrest, political disagreements, conflicts everywhere. So it's definitely a VUCA world. And we, in the interest of time, so one proposition here, one central proposition that I would like to make here, in addition to continuing all the other discussions we already started to uncover, is but one proposition I want to make here is to make a practice turn in evaluation, and to actually look at what is it that we do in practice, in evaluation practice, what do we do as evaluators in this new normal. And here I have written an article in 2020 together with my co-authors Martin Reynolds and Ray Eisen, where we are proposing that towards systemic evaluation in these turbulent times, a second order practice shift would be useful and required, we would argue. So so what do we do when we do what we do is a second order question, which is inspired by Umberto Maturana, who some of you are probably familiar with, but it basically invites us to look at ourselves in this system as part of the system. So when we are, what are the distinctions basically? So first order tradition is very much what we are used to in evaluation, to study the objects of evaluation as we can study, evaluate, and measure objectively as external, independent, impartial, or whatever evaluators. So external to the evaluants we are evaluating, with fixed objectives, targets, goals, and very linear causations, for example, log frames and theories of change, as we discussed already. And the second order tradition would imply that we would include ourselves as evaluators, as recognizing ourselves, we are part of the system. And the way that we are doing an evaluation itself changes the system, for example. So this recognition that we are ourselves part of the system, cannot separate ourselves from the system we are evaluating. We are not external, we are part of this as an intervention too. and to understand engaging evaluators' roles, for example, is engaging experientially and relationally in the situations that we are part of ourselves, and to encourage reflexivity about a reality that we're looking at that includes the evaluator themselves and anyone involved in an evaluation. So that's kind of the suggestion of the second order shift, to make this second order shift from the first order, which is totally valid in many circumstances, but that in turbulent times we are required to make this second order shift. So that's the proposition. And then to conclude, to just incorporate this image here, perhaps, to that we not only, in coming back to the definition of evaluation as being a systematic process, which is even in the very definition, and that's in the realm down here, in this duality of between systematic and systemic, that we need a recognition that we need both. We absolutely need the systematic. We need the tools and methods that we have in evaluation, the measurement, the monitoring, the theories of change, and all these established methods are valid and necessary, and we need to have a systematic process for them, absolutely, to produce valid evidence. But we also need the systemic, the view of the whole, we require, and not only that, but really seeing all the factors that impact on the situation, see them interconnected with other systems, subsystems, super systems, and the interconnections between elements, the multiple perspectives when it comes to the values, the underpinning values that are determining that, to appreciate the multiple perspectives, and the boundaries that we always making boundary decisions. What's a project? What's a program? What's the evaluant that we are looking at? So, and we could maybe make different boundary judgments and critique the boundary judgments that are being made. And so we need both, and that's the proposition here for systemic evaluation, and that I would want to leave you with basically for today. And now to conclude, basically we're running out of time. So to conclude, just to conclude on my side, so this discussion is to be continued soon, and let's stay in conversation. So we will have a new event about this, continuation event about this in the new year. We will announce that. So in order to stay in touch, please join our SCiO Ireland mailing list here, which you also find in the chat. And you can contact me at this email address. And here is our page of SCiO Ireland as well. And then I move over to let Louise maybe conclude then.
Brilliant. So just to thank everyone so much for coming along today. I hope you found it useful in that. And like Barbara said, the conversation is to be continued in January. We've put our mailing list into the chat just there now. And like Barbara said, there's an event that's happening in December. There is a small charge involved because we have room hire when we meet in person and that as well. But hopefully you might come along, or you might come along to future events. And also we just wanted to leave you with a question on that too, around how or can we make shifts to more kind of systemic evaluation. So I'd just like to thank Barbara again for today and that really interesting presentation, and thank you to all of you for coming along and participating in the conversation as well. So